From the News Channel 5 Network, this is Urban Outlook.
Hello and welcome to Urban Outlook. I'm April Eaton. Thank you so much for being with us today. You know, the race to the White House is certainly an interesting one in lieu of a better, but at least a generic way to describe the political election this year. And now President Barack Obama has hit the campaign trail for the first time to help bolster support, and some may say African-American support, for presumptive Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton. This on the heels of a new poll that says Republican nominee Donald Trump has 1%, that's out of 100%, but 1% of support from black voters. So it raises the question, how important is the black vote? Does the black vote still exist in this election? And here to discuss this topic and some others around voting issues is Dr. Sekou Franklin, who's the Associate Professor of Political Science at Middle Tennessee State University. Thank you so much for being with us, Dr. Franklin.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So as I said, there's a new poll that just came out, and it's from Quinnipiac University, and I didn't mean to stumble over that university, but they've got a polling institute there. Just a few days old. It says Republican nominee Donald Trump has about 1% of support of African-American voters. By comparison, Hillary Clinton has 91%. I wonder, surprised about the 1% for Donald?
No, it's not surprising. The main issue, I think, is over the last 2 decades, in particular, the African-American vote for Democrats in presidential elections has consolidated around anywhere from 89% to 95%. In the earlier period of the early 1980s, the African-American vote consolidated around Democrats as well, but Republicans probably were able to win over just a few more African-Americans then than they were able to do now. So the African-American vote has become increasingly consolidated and cohesive around the Democratic Party in national elections, somewhere between 90%, 95%. What Donald Trump then does in this kind of national political landscape is that he many African Americans may see him as running a kind of modern day George Wallace campaign. George Wallace in the early 1970s ran a campaign that tried to essentially racially prime voters, use a lot of racial symbolism, and also explicitly kind of racial appeals to a lot of white working class voters as a way to win them over into his electoral coalition. And so many political scientists, many political observers have made the argument that in 2016, Donald Trump has run kind of a modern version of that. And in doing that, that's turned off increasingly more African Americans, more racial minorities. So to see that Donald Trump only has potentially 1% of African American vote is not all that surprising.
So, and some might say maybe not even turned off, but he doesn't even care about our vote, maybe some might say.
No, part of that is with Donald Trump is infrastructure-wise as well. It's been widely reported that he has virtually no campaign infrastructure operation, particularly in those key swing states that can actually make these kinds of appeals and do the kind of hard grassroots mobilization to win over African Americans and other racial minorities or people of color. So part of that is infrastructure, but part of that is that he's running a base campaign. He's running a campaign in which he feels that he can appeal to members of the Republican Party base, often the most racially resentful and kind of racially extreme members of his base, and not worried about moderates or centrist voters. And in doing that, he's not making any real headway in trying to appeal to African Americans in a way that I think you saw someone like George W. Bush in 2000. He tried to, people may criticize it as being overly symbolic or ineffective, but he still tried nonetheless. But Donald Trump has not made those kinds of appeals or inroads in the African American community.
It's really interesting, especially the whole racial part of it, because 8 years ago we were sort of passionate and very prideful as we watched President Obama take office, right? And you saw those scenes and pictures and video of African Americans and other minorities everywhere who were just touched and moved by the fact that our president was our first African American president to take office. And now it seems to be a whole different set of emotions going on with this election. So kind of describe the changes that we're seeing in this day and time versus what we've seen in the past.
Well, this election is somewhat unlike any other that most of us have seen with Donald Trump in the race. I think in 2008 there was a lot of enthusiasm around Obama, particularly among young voters and particularly among African Americans. The infrastructure that Obama put together in 2008 and really perfected in 2012 was quite outstanding. For example, he was able to tap into barbershops, beauty salons as voter mobilization infrastructures to help get out the vote and help increase enthusiasm among African Americans. Whereas this election, you had a division inside of the Democratic Party between the Sanders wing and Hillary Clinton wing. Most African Americans, at least long-time voters, middle-income African Americans, African American leaders and organizations consolidated their support in favor or around Hillary Clinton. But a lot of younger African Americans and perhaps more progressive grassroots activists.
Even Midwesterners, I think. There's a geographical difference as well.
Absolutely. They lean more in favor of Bernie Sanders, although it should be pointed out that Hillary Clinton did win over the majority of African American vote. But because of that, the infrastructure, I think, that it takes to build a campaign has just evolved differently than what we saw in 2008, 2012. There's been a lot of also grievance in the African American community. There's this phrase that was told to me 20 years ago or so by an old college professor, is that at times in which African Americans may feel as if they can see the promised land but they can't get there. And when they can see the promised land but can't get there, then their grievance intensifies, then their angst intensifies. And you may have seen some of that with Barack Obama, where they saw the promised land, but they couldn't get there. That certain issues around unemployment, certain issues around police misconduct, police killings that are unresolved, the backlash against voting, the restrictions on voting rights, the racial backlash, what that's done, I think, is created this kind of angst in the African American community, and it's intensified certain kinds of grievances. So the African American vote, I think that where African Americans stand, I think African Americans will be there in 2016.
You think?
I think they'll be there behind Hillary Clinton. Now, whether or not the enthusiasm is going to be there, whether or not the output, the number of people who turn out, whether that's going to be there, that's going to be the question.
Right.
And I think
we'll do it just to do it, is what you're saying.
I think we'll do it just to do it. But I think seeing those numbers in which Barack Obama, I believe, achieved, I think the numbers suggest somewhere between 66% to 68% black voter turnout in the 2012 election, and similar numbers in 2008. Whether we'll see that is going to be the larger question, whether or not you can turn out. And an African American vote is going to matter. I mean, if you think about this election, I know that some Democratic Party leaders and party activists, and even some African Americans, feel that Donald Trump has dug himself in such a deep hole that he can't climb out of. But that's still untested. I mean, if you think about where the African American vote is going to matter, you're talking about Florida, you're talking about North Carolina, you're talking about Ohio. Those swing states where African Americans are essentially front and center in terms of the voter mobilization. Those swing states are going to matter, and the African American vote is going to matter in those particular states. And
because some might say, if you sit and do nothing, back to your point about this other faction, this group that says, why bother? There was a story recently in Fusion that it said where, even though black turnout has steadily climbed over past generation, that there are a lot of people who feel disaffected by the electoral process, and that they are choosing to sit this one out because they say, why bother? They don't feel like that, no matter who the candidate is, there'll be a candidate for them. So if we sit and do nothing, then that may put whatever your belief is at risk, right? So whatever person you want to vote for, they may be at risk if we have a huge segment of folks who choose to sit out. Absolutely, and it's incumbent upon the candidates and their surrogates to explain to the American electorate, and in this case particularly African Americans, in bright lines, what is it that Hillary Clinton or their candidates at the state and local levels will offer to them, and in a very explicit fashion that the other candidates won't do, and then to link that with the broader voter mobilization infrastructure, and those two things can actually help to
stabilize the black vote or can turn voters out. And it should be noted that although there's a lot of disaffected voters, and although some people have grievances, that at least on the Democratic Party side, there have been good responses to these grievances. As an example, with the issues around police misconduct, police brutality. I mean, if you've lived long enough, you know that police killings, police misconduct have gone on forever,
yes.
but rarely have they been discussed front and center of presidential campaigns, at least on the Democratic Party side. So, but what you saw in this presidential primary was both candidates, because of grassroots pressure, Black Lives Matter, efforts by coalitions focusing on what Michelle Alexander calls the new Jim Crow, and a whole range of grassroots pressures. These candidates, put these issues front and center in many of the rallies that they had and many of the discussions. If you look at local elections, the district attorneys' races in places like Cleveland and Chicago, places in which district attorneys were defeated by grassroots coalitions made up of previously disaffected voters who found that their grievances weren't being addressed. So there are examples in which these grievances that are expressed by disaffected voters are being at least rhetorically addressed, and in some cases substantively addressed. But I think to match the numbers of 2012, numbers that Obama was able to produce, it's going to take a lot more storytelling, a lot more explicit statements about what the preferred candidates are African Americans, or what Democratic candidates are offering African Americans to make sure that their vote actually reaches those numbers of 2012 and 2008.
We're going to take a quick break, but you touched on a couple of things that have intrigued me. One, that what have you done for me lately mentality, and whether talking the talk now will end up in results later when they're in office, which is also a big issue that's often discussed. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll have more with Dr. Franklin on the black vote. We'll be right back.